My research question has to do with whether or not Clint Eastwood represents himself as the poster boy for toxic masculinity in his movies. With Clint Eastwood in his movies, there is a lot of violence towards other people, and with that, there comes some sort of backlash, if you will, from critics who view his films. When it comes to this question, I'm simply trying to show throughout different films how Clint Eastwood does not embody toxic masculinity and how he uses his masculinity in different, diverse ways and how he profoundly affects those around him in a positive light. Toxic masculinity has a negative connotation, but with Clint Eastwood, I'm trying to demonstrate that he is simply using his powers for good in the best and necessary ways possible. I'm trying to get people to see that Clint Eastwood is indeed an extremely versatile artist as his career goes on. At times, I find myself tracking the arc of how Clint Eastwood may have been in one portion of his film career to how he is in more recent films. I trace the arc as to how Eastwood changes from a form of toxic masculinity to a positive one that would appear and seem to be much more acceptable for today. The idea behind this is the fact that I'm trying to prove that Clint Eastwood in fact doesn't represent toxic masculinity in his movies that are being presented. This matters due to the fact that toxic masculinity is pervasive in today's society. There's this image, necessity, and pressure to be what is considered a manly man. And what comes with it is certain expectations backed by insecurity. People feel the need to live up to a certain standard of masculinity that seems to breed violence and danger towards other people. As time goes on, we need to understand that masculinity is not a one-size-fits-all standard for everyone and that toxic masculinity is in fact not acceptable in today's world. People need to live by their own standards of masculinity, and with Clint Eastwood, we get to see how masculinity takes different shapes and forms in a positive light that benefits other people. The reason I am bringing Clint Eastwood into this conversation is because he is a symbol for masculinity who at one point had characters in his films that were extremely violent in his early career. As he aged, he began experimenting with masculinity in its different shapes and forms. One topic from my paper is how Eastwood's characters treat women. This is one of the qualities that Eastwood starts out as an example of toxic masculinity, and I track the arc as to how he makes the change within his character over time. The next two paragraphs are from my paper. In another movie called High Plains Drifter, a classic example of toxic masculinity will be the altercation with this one woman at the beginning of the movie. What happens is the woman bumps into Clint Eastwood's character on purpose, the two exchange some words, and she knocks Clint Eastwood's cigar out of his mouth. Clint Eastwood's character grabs her and takes her to a nearby barn where he rapes her. This is completely unacceptable behavior on Eastwood's part and completely unjustifiable as well. Obviously, he doesn't treat her properly in this situation without consent and was completely uncalled for. This was complete disrespect, and he doesn't go about handling and treating this woman properly. This ties back in with toxic masculinity and the use of women as a sexual object. Along with this, he dominates her and uses force against her that was against her will and well-being. In Unforgiven, this marks a turning point as to how Eastwood treats women. Even though he doesn't have much contact with women throughout the movie, when he does, it is interesting as to how he handles the situation with women. The reason he gets in contact with a woman in the first place is because there is a bounty placed on these men for cutting up a prostitute's face. Eastwood and the prostitute get in contact with one another. Eastwood's character respects her for helping him heal up after a previous altercation. Later on in the conversation, the woman offers to have sex with Eastwood. However, Eastwood's character declines. Eastwood in this case would have been able to have sexual relations with that woman, but he respectfully declines. The old Eastwood most likely would have accepted the sexual encounter. Instead, Eastwood doesn't use her as a sexual object, and he respects her as a woman. The relationship that he has with this woman wasn't hostile or sexual. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.